Sarah Wilson thought she knew her husband, Officer Mark Wilson, a decorated cop, a devoted father, and the man she'd trusted with everything. But one night, when she walked into her 12-year-old daughter Lily's room and saw the unthinkable, that illusion shattered. What happened next turned a quiet suburban home into the center of a horrifying true crime that shocked the entire community. The Wilson family lived in a quiet neighborhood where lawns were always trimmed. Kids rode their bikes on tree-lined streets, and neighbors waved to one another like clockwork. Their house sat at the corner of a cul-de-sac, painted a soft beige with white shutters and a flag waving on the porch. Mark Wilson, the man of the house, was a police officer with nearly 15 years on the force. People admired him. He was known for his calm demeanor, punctuality, and that look of authority that made people feel both safe and obedient. Mark wasn't just a police officer. He was the kind people called in emergencies even when they weren't in uniform. His presence gave people comfort. No one ever questioned his intentions. Sarah Wilson, Mark's wife, was the definition of devoted. She had met Mark when she was just 19 and had left college a year later to marry him. She supported him through every promotion, cooked meals by 5 p.m., and handled every detail of their home life with precision. Their daughter, Lily, came into their lives 12 years ago, and from the moment she was born, Sarah built her world around her child. To outsiders, they were a picture-perfect family, respectable, attractive, wholesome. Sarah volunteered at school bake sales. Mark coached Lily's softball team. They had Christmas cards with matching outfits and summer barbecues filled with laughter and polite conversation. But, as often happens behind the polished facades of suburbia, something far darker was growing beneath the surface. Sarah had begun to feel it before she could name it. At first, it was small things: Mark insisting he be the one to help Lily shower when she was younger, even when Sarah offered. He was oddly possessive, always wanting to be the one to tuck her in, even if it meant getting home late from a shift. Sarah brushed it off as fatherly affection. She told herself Mark was just protective, the way good fathers are. But that unease never really went away. Over the past year, Lily had started changing. She used to be an outgoing, cheerful girl who loved dancing around the living room and drawing pictures for her mom. Lately, though, she had grown quiet. Her spark seemed dimmed. She was quick to flinch when touched. Even by Sarah, her drawings turned from sunny parks and flowers to storm clouds and shadowy figures. When Sarah asked what was wrong, Lily would shut down, retreating into herself. Sarah began noticing patterns. Mark had become even more controlling. He demanded Lily not have sleepovers anymore, saying it was unsafe. He was always the one to pick her up from school, even if Sarah was available. He didn't allow her to have a phone, saying she was too young and too vulnerable to outside influences. He dismissed Sarah's concerns with calm authority, as though her instincts were irrational. One night, Sarah woke to find Mark not in bed. She wandered the house quietly, her mother's intuition gnawing at her. She found the light in Lily's room turned off but noticed a faint glow beneath the door. When she pushed it open, Mark was sitting on the edge of Lily's bed. She was under the covers, silent. Mark turned to Sarah calmly and said Lily had a bad dream. His shirt was half unbuttoned. Sarah felt a cold sweat rush over her body. She said nothing. Mark kissed Lily on the forehead and walked past his wife back to bed. Sarah stood in that room for several minutes, staring at her daughter's pale face in the glow of a nightlight. Lily didn't look at her. She just closed her eyes tightly and turned away. Sarah told herself it was nothing, that she was imagining things. But her mind kept returning to moments she had once dismissed, how Mark never let Lily lock her door, how she had once caught him watching her undress through a cracked bathroom door, how he always got irritated when Sarah tried to take Lily shopping or spend time alone with her. The thoughts that came to Sarah now were too dark to speak aloud, but they wouldn't leave her alone. One afternoon, while cleaning Lily's room, Sarah accidentally knocked over a stack of books and found something hidden underneath, a small black notebook. Its pages were filled with disturbing drawings, figures with dark holes for eyes, red marks surrounding small stick figures, a child crying in a bed with a looming shadow nearby. In one corner, over and over, Lily had written the word monster in shaking letters. Sarah clutched the book to her chest and sat on the floor, her entire body trembling. She finally allowed herself to ask the question she'd been too afraid to form before. What if the man she had built her life with, the father of her child, the protector in uniform, was the very thing her daughter feared most? Still, she hesitated. If she was wrong, it could destroy everything. But if she was right, the cost of silence was unthinkable. Sarah made a choice that night. She would no longer depend on instincts and shadows. She needed the truth. So while Mark was on shift, she went online and ordered a small hidden camera, the kind designed to look like an alarm clock. It arrived 2 days later. She placed it on Lily's bookshelf, aimed directly at the bed. She didn't tell anyone. Not even Lily. She needed proof, not suspicion. Not fear, proof, and she knew she wouldn't have to wait long. Sarah's hands trembled the night she set up the camera in Lily's room. She positioned it carefully, adjusting the lens until it pointed directly at the bed, making sure it was hidden well among the books and trinkets. It looked harmless, just another device on a crowded shelf. She didn't tell Lily. Her daughter had already grown quiet and guarded, and Sarah didn't want to add more fear or confusion. Instead, she kissed her goodnight as usual, tucked a blanket under her chin, and whispered that everything would be okay soon. Lily didn't respond. Her eyes remained fixed on the ceiling, her body stiff and still. That night, Sarah lay in bed, wide awake, heart pounding as minutes turned into hours. Every creak in the house made her sit up. When Mark came home from his late shift, he was calm and tired, as always. He kissed her forehead and slipped into bed beside her. But Sarah couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling for the rest of the night, counting down the hours until morning. By dawn, she was already up, coffee in hand, waiting for the house to stir. As soon as Mark left for work and Lily was busy with breakfast, Sarah locked herself in the study with the camera's memory card. Her fingers were shaking as she inserted it into the laptop. The screen flickered to life, and there it was, hours of footage. She fast-forwarded through the stillness, through Lily tossing and turning in her sleep. Then, at 1:14 a.m., movement. Mark entered the room. Sarah froze. The screen showed him stepping silently into the dark room, a faint light illuminating the space from the hallway. He closed the door behind him and sat on the edge of Lily's bed. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Mark reached out and stroked Lily's hair, then pulled back the blanket. What happened next made Sarah recoil from the screen. Her hand shot to her mouth to muffle the sound building in her throat. He wasn't comforting her. He wasn't acting like a father. He was touching her in ways no man should ever touch a child, and Lily lay there, unmoving, tears streaming down the sides of her face. Sarah slammed the laptop shut and stumbled out of the room, her body heaving with silent sobs. She collapsed on the bathroom floor, unable to breathe, unable to think. Every second of that footage was a dagger to her soul. The man she had married, the man she trusted with her life, had been violating their daughter under her own roof. The weight of that truth pressed down on her like a mountain. Her mind raced with fury, guilt, disbelief. How long had it been going on? How had she not seen it earlier? Later that day, Sarah retrieved the notebook again. The pages took on a new meaning now. The drawings, the word monster, the terrified expressions. Lily had been screaming for help in the only way she knew how. And Sarah had missed it. Or worse, she had seen the signs and talked herself out of believing them. She thought about the times she left Lily alone with Mark, the nights he insisted on putting her to bed, the strange behavior she had chalked up to overprotectiveness. Now, everything fell into place like pieces of a sickening puzzle. She knew what she was supposed to do. She was supposed to call the police, file a report, hand over the footage. But then she imagined Mark in an interrogation room, weaving lies with the same calm charm he used on neighbors and colleagues. She imagined the department closing ranks, protecting their own. What if they didn't believe Lily? What if they found a way to dismiss the evidence? Mark knew the law better than anyone. He would find the loopholes, he would walk free, and then he would come back. Sarah couldn't let that happen. The justice system wasn't built for this. It moved slowly. It questioned victims. It gave monsters too many chances. Her daughter didn't have time to wait for a courtroom and a judge. She needed safety now. That evening, Sarah acted like nothing had changed. She made dinner, laughed softly at Mark's stories, and washed dishes as he read the newspaper. Inside, though, she was unraveling. A storm brewed beneath her skin, silent, steady, and powerful. She watched him laugh with Lily at the table and felt a white-hot fury swell in her chest. Every movement he made, every word he said, made her stomach churn. She couldn't bear the sight of him anymore. But she also couldn't let him suspect a thing. She planned carefully. She knew where Mark kept his service weapon, on a high shelf in the closet, in a locked case he thought no one could access. But Sarah had lived with him long enough to know where he kept the key, tucked behind the radiator in the hallway. She retrieved it when no one was looking, tried it in the lock, and felt the satisfying click of the case opening. She stared at the gun for a long time. It was heavier than she expected. Cold, real. She didn't know how to fire it, but she didn't care. She didn't need to know how. She just needed to be close. That night, she made Lily sleep in the guest room under the excuse of wanting a girls' night. She locked the door and placed a chair under the handle, just in case. Then she waited. The house grew quiet. She knew exactly what Mark would do next. He always followed the same pattern, but this time she would be waiting. This time he wouldn't walk out of Lily's room. The house was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling wood. It was the kind of silence that felt heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed in the dark guest room, listening. Every sound echoed louder in her head: the ticking of the clock, the rustle of the curtains, the faint thump of her own heartbeat. Lily lay asleep on the mattress beside her, curled into a tight ball, her face buried in the pillow. She hadn't asked questions about the change in sleeping arrangements. She didn't complain. That quiet obedience told Sarah everything she needed to know. Down the hall, a door opened. Sarah tensed, holding her breath. She knew the sound well: Mark's footsteps moving across the floor, slow and deliberate. They paused near Lily's bedroom door. Sarah imagined him opening it, expecting to find her daughter lying there in silence, helpless as always. But tonight the bed would be empty, the routine would be broken. She stood up, her hands wrapped tightly around the cold grip of the gun. It felt like it didn't belong to her, like it was just an object borrowed from someone else's nightmare. But she clung to it anyway. Her legs moved before her mind could catch up. She crept into the hallway, her bare feet silent against the floorboards. The only light came from the dim glow of a nightlight down the hall. Shadows danced along the walls as she moved, each step pulling her deeper into the weight of what she was about to do. Lily's door was open now. The faint outline of Mark's body was visible inside. He was sitting on the edge of the bed the same way he always did. His back was to her, unaware of the change in presence, unaware that the girl lying under the blanket was no longer his daughter, but an empty bed meant to lure him in. Sarah raised the gun, her arms trembled. She'd never held a weapon before, never imagined she would. But the image of her daughter crying, motionless, beneath the weight of her father burned in her memory like a brand. She took a step into the room. The floor creaked beneath her weight. Mark turned. For a moment he didn't move. His eyes adjusted to the light and met hers. There was no confusion in his face, no guilt, just surprise, as if he had been caught in a lie he didn't expect to be exposed so soon. His shirt was unbuttoned. His hands were mid-motion. They froze in place. Sarah didn't speak. She didn't scream or accuse. She simply lifted the gun higher, aimed it at his chest, and pulled the trigger. The sound shattered the silence like glass. Mark jerked backward, collapsing onto the floor. A dark stain began to spread across his shirt. His limbs twitched for a moment, then went still. Sarah stood over him, her hands still locked in place, her mind detached from her body. Time moved slowly. The world outside the room faded away. The only thing that existed was the body on the floor and the weight of what she had just done, but it wasn't over. He was still breathing shallow, erratic. His eyes opened and looked up at her, a flicker of pain and disbelief crossing his face. She raised the gun again. This time she didn't hesitate. She aimed higher and fired once more. The second shot was final. Sarah dropped the gun to the floor and stepped back, her entire body shaking. She felt a scream building in her chest but swallowed it. There was no one to hear it. The act was done. She walked out of the room and closed the door behind her. The hallway seemed longer now, each step heavier than the last. She returned to the guest room where Lily still lay asleep, undisturbed by the sound. Sarah sat on the floor beside her, her back pressed against the door. She wrapped her arms around her knees and waited for morning. At dawn, she called the police. The call was calm. She gave her name, her address, and stated clearly that she had shot her husband. When the dispatcher asked why, she said there was evidence in her home that would explain everything. She made no effort to flee, no attempt to hide what she had done. She only asked that they send someone quickly, for the sake of her daughter. Within minutes, the street outside was filled with flashing lights. Officers stormed the house with guns drawn, expecting danger. Instead, they found Sarah sitting at the kitchen table, hands folded neatly in her lap. The gun was on the counter. The camera was beside it. She directed them to the footage and then to the body down the hall. No one spoke for a long time after they reviewed what she had captured. They arrested her as protocol demanded. They placed her in handcuffs and read her rights. She didn't resist. She didn't cry. As they led her away, she looked back only once, toward the hallway where Lily still slept in the guest room. The child had no idea yet that the monster was gone. Sarah knew the battle ahead would be long. There would be trials, questions, endless analysis of her actions. But she also knew one thing with absolute certainty. She had done what no one else could. She had stopped him. The moment Sarah stepped into the interrogation room, the weight of everything she had done began to settle on her shoulders like a slow-building storm. The walls were bare, painted in dull gray, the air sterile and still. A camera blinked silently in the corner. Across from her sat two detectives, both grim-faced, each holding a notepad, though neither took notes for the first few minutes. They had watched the footage, they had seen the drawings. They had seen the aftermath, but their job was not to feel. Their job was to ask questions. Sarah recounted the events with a strange sense of detachment, like she was describing someone else's story. She told them everything: how she had suspected, how she'd found the drawings, how she installed the camera, and what she saw in that recording. She described how she had waited, how she had locked Lily in the guest room to keep her safe, how she had walked down the hallway with the gun in her hands, how she had pulled the trigger. She left nothing out. When she was finished, there was silence. One detective leaned back in his chair and exhaled deeply. The other nodded slowly and said they would verify everything. Sarah was booked into a local detention center and held without bail pending an investigation. The news spread quickly. A police officer had been shot and killed by his own wife. The media descended on the suburban neighborhood like vultures, eager to twist every piece of the story into something salacious. Initial headlines painted Sarah as a cold-blooded killer, a housewife turned murderer, someone who had snapped for reasons unknown, but then the evidence began to leak. Journalists obtained parts of the notebook Lily had written. Anonymous sources confirmed the footage existed and described in broad terms what had been captured. Mark Wilson's name was now attached to horrifying accusations. The public narrative shifted. Sarah was no longer just the woman who had killed a police officer. She was the mother who had stopped a predator. The town, once united in admiration of Officer Wilson, now stood divided. Some refused to believe it. They remembered Mark as a good man, a loyal friend, someone who coached Little League and helped stranded neighbors fix their cars. They clung to the idea that there had to be a mistake. But others, especially those who knew Lily, began to recall moments that now felt suspicious: how she'd withdrawn, how Mark never allowed her to visit friends, how he hovered too close. The police department was under scrutiny. Questions were raised about prior complaints against Mark. Internal Affairs had documented at least 2 informal accusations over the years, both from parents who had voiced concerns about Mark's interactions with young girls during community events, but nothing had ever come of them. The reports were quietly closed, and Mark had continued on untouched, protected by the uniform and the culture of silence within the department. Now those decisions were being called into question. Lawsuits were threatened. Investigations were reopened. Meanwhile, Sarah's legal team prepared her defense. They argued that she had acted to protect her daughter, that the justice system would not have helped in time. The footage was central to their case. It showed not only the abuse but also the expression on Mark's face, the calm and familiarity with which he entered that room. This was not a moment of misjudgment, it was a pattern. A secret life carried out behind closed doors for who knows how long. Mental health experts were brought in to evaluate Sarah. They described her state of mind as one of extreme psychological trauma. She had discovered that the man she trusted most had betrayed her in the most vile way imaginable. Her actions, though violent, stemmed from desperation and fear. She had no prior history of violence, no criminal record. She was a mother, they said, who had made an irreversible decision in the face of unimaginable horror. Lily, meanwhile, had been placed with Sarah's sister in another state. She was receiving therapy, though progress was slow. She spoke little, ate little, and clung to silence as her only comfort. Experts said she was suffering from complex trauma. They recommended ongoing treatment and a safe, consistent environment, something that was finally possible now that her father was no longer present. Sarah was allowed supervised video calls with her daughter. Those moments, brief and quiet, were all that kept her grounded during her time in custody. Months passed before the case went to court. By that time, the footage had been sealed, but the court had reviewed it in full. Prosecutors reduced the charges from murder to voluntary manslaughter. Sarah's lawyers pushed for a suspended sentence. The judge, in a rare moment of measured empathy, delivered a final decision that shocked many. Sarah would not serve additional time in prison. She would be placed on 5 years probation and undergo mandatory counseling. The reasoning was clear. Her actions, while legally punishable, had prevented continued abuse. The law had failed to protect Lily, and Sarah had stepped in where it had not. The courtroom remained silent as the judge read the verdict. Sarah exhaled for the first time in what felt like an eternity. It was not complete freedom. It was not justice in the traditional sense, but it was enough. It was something. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions, but Sarah didn't speak. She walked past them into the waiting car and left behind the building, the cameras, the whispers. She had one goal left: to rebuild what was broken, to find a way back to her daughter, and to help her heal. Because what mattered now was not what had happened in that room, but what came after. Months after the trial ended, Sarah Wilson began the slow process of trying to piece together a life that no longer resembled the one she had known. The house where everything had happened was sold quietly, without fanfare. She didn't return to collect most of her belongings. The furniture, the photographs on the walls, even the little keepsakes that once held sentimental value now felt haunted. Too many memories, too many shadows. She wanted nothing from that place. Starting over, even if imperfect and painful, felt like the only path forward. She moved into a modest apartment in a neighboring county. It was small, with plain walls and mismatched furniture donated by a local women's support group. But it was clean, quiet, safe. She spent most of her days attending therapy sessions, group meetings, and court-mandated check-ins. Her nights were lonelier. The silence that used to frighten her was now oddly comforting. She filled the empty hours with books and notes from Lily's therapists, learning how to support a child who had endured the kind of trauma no child should. Lily was still living with Sarah's sister Amanda in a different state. It had been the best decision at the time, ensuring her daughter had stability while Sarah navigated the legal storm. Their interactions remained limited to video calls, supervised at first, then slowly extended. Lily barely spoke during the early conversations. She would sit on her aunt's lap or in the corner of the screen, occasionally nodding or shaking her head, her eyes distant and guarded. Sarah never pushed. She simply showed up every time, offering a quiet presence and an open heart. With time, cracks in Lily's wall began to show. One evening during a call, she whispered a single sentence before logging off. "I sleep better now." It was the first true sign of peace Sarah had heard in her daughter's voice. It brought her to tears. From that moment on, she became more determined than ever to rebuild trust. To show Lily that her safety wasn't temporary, that love didn't have to hurt, and that her mother would never look away again. The media eventually moved on, as it always does. New scandals replaced old ones, and Sarah's story faded from headlines. The whispers around town died down. People stopped pointing fingers and lowered their voices. She was no longer the woman who had shot her husband. She was just someone who had survived something horrific. That anonymity was welcome. In private, Sarah began writing. It started as scattered notes in a journal, then slowly took shape as a memoir. Not a story of revenge, not even one of tragedy, but of awakening. Of seeing the unseeable and doing the unthinkable because no one else would. Writing became her therapy. She didn't seek fame. She didn't want attention. But she hoped that one day her words might reach someone who needed to know they weren't alone. That monsters can hide in plain sight, that even the strongest lies unravel under truth. Lily continued her therapy, progressing at her own pace. Amanda kept Sarah updated on every milestone the day Lily returned to school. The first time she attended a friend's birthday party, the moment she smiled without forcing it. Each update was a quiet celebration. Though the scars would never fully disappear, healing had begun. After a year, Lily agreed to visit her mother for the first time. It was supervised, structured, and filled with cautious boundaries, but it was a beginning. Sarah prepared their time together meticulously, making sure everything felt safe and familiar. They spent the weekend doing small things, baking cookies, painting tiny ceramic animals, watching old cartoons. There were long silences, but they were comfortable ones. On the second night, Lily placed her hand in Sarah's without being asked. No words, just touch. It was enough to bring Sarah to tears once Lily had gone to bed. Over time, supervised visits became unsupervised. Weekends turned into weeks. Eventually, Sarah and Lily were approved for reunification. Amanda, who had stepped in with unwavering strength when Sarah couldn't, supported the transition fully. It wasn't perfect. There were difficult nights, unexpected triggers, moments when the past echoed too loudly, but they faced it together. Sarah never returned to her old life. She didn't try to reclaim the roles she had lost. Instead, she found purpose in advocating for survivors. She partnered with local nonprofits, speaking at small events and helping mothers recognize signs of abuse. She told her story not to relive it, but to help others rewrite their own. Lily grew older, stronger. Her voice returned, quiet but steady. In middle school, she wrote an essay titled "The Day the Monster Went Away." It didn't name names or dwell on details, but it ended with a line her teacher never forgot. "My mom believed me without me even saying a word. That's how I knew I was finally safe." In time, Sarah and Lily built a new life not defined by what they had survived, but by how they had chosen to live afterward. They carried the past, yes, but they no longer lived in it. Their story, once written in shadows, had found its way to the light, and in that light they learned how to begin again.